The movie begins with Lee, who has her arms bound to a rod attached to her back. She walks inside an office to take care of her usual work before heading to another room nearby. There, she starts recalling how different things were 6 months earlier and how she left the mental institution she was staying at on the day of her sister's wedding. That day, the doctor in charge of her bids Lee farewell while she anxiously waits for her ride home. When her mother, Joan, arrives to pick her up, she tries to greet Lee happily, but Lee just stares blankly at her. At the wedding, Lee watches as her sister and her husband kiss, to which she softly claps. Peter approaches her to ask if she's happy to be home. Lee nods at first, but when Peter asks again, she tells him that she doesn't know. Later in the reception, Lee's father, Bert, greets her while drinking beer. Lee tells him that she thought he had stopped drinking, but he ignores her and gives his bottle to Peter. Clearly drunk, Bert then takes a seat to drink some more before Lee storms off to her room. Inside, Lee looks through her bed and finds her old things from before she was sent to the mental institution. She gets one of the dolls there to sharpen it, and with that, Lee is ready to cut herself on the thigh. Lee stops, however, when she sees her sister leave with her husband in a limousine. That night, while Lee is boiling some water, she overhears her parents arguing about Bert's drinking and how he was just fired from his job. Lee moves closer to see what's happening and is shocked to see her father pushing Joan down to the ground before leaving the house. Afterwards, Lee returns to the kitchen and takes the hot water to her room, putting the hot kettle on her thigh and burning her skin. She smiles, looking like she enjoys hurting herself. The next day, Lee attends a typewriting class, where she gets to show how exceptional she is with it until her mother comes to pick her up. On the drive home, Lee recalls an accident that she had with a knife in the past. When they arrive, Joan carefully hides some knives, which Lee catches her doing when she walks in. Locking the knives inside a shelf, Joan tells her that she's just doing this as a precaution, while Lee simply stares at her before going outside to throw some trash. In the bin, Lee finds her old sewing kit and decides to pick it up. While taking the kit, she also spots a newspaper page with job ads, so she takes it as well before returning inside. Back in her room, she reviews some of the job listings while practicing some lines she could say during her job interviews. The day after, Lee goes to one of the addresses of the listings in the newspaper. As she enters the office, she is surprised to find it all messed up with a woman in tears leaving the place. Still, Lee continues to make her way in, and when she moves deeper into the office, she finds Mr. Gray, who was looking at a picture of a blonde woman before Lee arrived. After introducing themselves to each other, Mr. Gray asks strange questions to Lee, like if she's pregnant and if she lives in an apartment, and Lee nervously answers them. As Mr. Gray starts asking about Lee's awards, he flips a button and reveals a beautiful garden, making Lee gasp at its beauty. After that, Lee gives her typing scores to Mr. Gray, who's dialing on his phone and asking Lee for a cup of coffee. Lee does as she's told and moves to the pantry to get Mr. Gray's coffee, accidentally drenching herself in the process when she tried to refill the water dispenser. When she returned to Mr. Gray's office, Mr. Gray tells Lee how boring this job will be and even comments on how uptight Lee is. He asks her if she'll ever loosen up, but Lee just smiles at him, saying that she doesn't know. The phone suddenly rings, and Mr. Gray tells her to just ignore it before instructing her to put less sugar in the coffee next time. With that, Lee heads over to Joan's car announcing to her mother that she got the job. When they arrive home, Lee relaxes in her bath and practices lines she would say at work. The following morning, Lee starts her first day at Mr. Gray's office. She runs errands for him, organizes his paperwork, sends files to his partners, and holds things for him. Afterwards, Lee stares inside Mr. Gray's room, watching him tend to the flowers in the garden before finally entering to leave some donuts for him. Mr. Gray mentions that he threw some notes away, and Lee offers to look for them in the garbage. The two stare at each other for a second before Lee leaves. As Lee searches through the garbage, Mr. Gray curiously stares at her from his window. Once she found the papers, she walks outside first and finds Joan there waiting for her. Lee tells her mother that she's staying there for 5 more hours, and Joan promises to wait before Lee heads back to Mr. Gray's room. He dismisses Lee when she tried handing over the papers to him, saying that he already found copies of them, and instead, he orders Lee to do more things. Though she tries her best to do them all, she ends up struggling while trying to set up a mousetrap by a chair. Mr. Gray starts checking her out, and Lee catches him. They lock eyes and stare at each other again before the phone rings by the front desk. Later, Lee is tending to her wounds from earlier when Mr. Gray sees her. Embarrassed, Lee stops and packs her things up while Mr. Gray watches by the door before leaving. After work, Lee and Joan talk about Lee's day, and Joan mentions that Peter called her, making Lee smile. Later, Lee meets up with Peter in a nearby laundromat. When they start talking about being in relationships, Lee chugs down a glass of wine. Shortly after, the two are talking about how much they've both changed since high school when Mr. Gray suddenly enters the laundromat. He notices Lee and Peter talking about underwear before they start kissing. Mr. Gray quickly looks away and returns to his car. At work the next day, a frustrated Mr. Gray storms to Lee and hands her a letter with 3 typing errors in it. Embarrassed, Lee apologizes, but Mr. Gray still gives her an earful before ordering her to retype it and get it right. Throughout the day, Lee tries to fix her mistakes, but she ends up redoing her letters repeatedly, frustrating her as she anxiously works on them again. By the end of the day, Lee goes to Mr. Gray's room and submits another letter for him. Mr. Gray ignores this at first in favor of ordering her to make a bill for a woman outside, but suddenly, he notices a tear in Lee's skirt, so he starts lecturing her, scolding her for the disgusting way she dresses and for her incessant fidgeting from her hair playing to her constant sniffing. Lee heads to the pantry, where she practices how she'll thank Mr. Gray for his suggestions since she's trying to be the best secretary for him. But when she's about to return to his office, she stops upon hearing him screaming and scolding someone else for their typing job. She then returns to the front desk, anxiously sitting there and playing with her hair. Later, after leaving the office, Lee goes to Peter's house, where the two are together with Peter's parents. The next day, Mr. Gray calls Lee to his office, then tells her to pick up the phone. Lee is confused since there is no ringing coming from it, but Mr. Gray suddenly starts making ringing noises, making Lee answer the phone. Mr. Gray then points out that Lee should have a bigger voice and that she should sound more confident in herself when she speaks. He then asks her to sit with him by his couch and asks if she's been on a date recently. Lee says yes, telling him that she was with Peter. When Mr. Gray asks if they've slept together, Lee laughs the question off and answers with no. They then talk about shyness and how it shouldn't stop them from opening up to each other before Mr. Gray starts asking about Lee's wounds and the sewing kit she always has. This takes Lee aback, and she only tells him that she's shy. Still, they laugh before Mr. Gray offers her some hot chocolate. As she drinks, Mr. Gray asks her why she hurts herself. When Lee says she doesn't know, he asks if it's because she needs to see proof of the pain she's feeling inside to remind her that she's really here, and if it's because watching the wound heal is comforting. Still surprised, Lee agrees with him, and he starts telling her that she will never hurt herself again. It's in the past now. Lee nervously nods her head and agrees yet again. He instructs her to leave work early, walk home, and breathe in the fresh air since she's a grown woman. Before leaving, Mr. Gray takes a photo of Lee as she smiles and laughs, now looking looser and more relaxed. As she leaves work, Lee tells her mother that she'll be taking walks from now on. Speaking to herself, she realizes that she's never walked alone before and that she's beginning to feel something for Mr. Gray. The next day at work, Mr. Gray angrily scolds Lee over a spelling mistake, making Lee sniffle again. Hearing this, Mr. Gray demands Lee to go to his office, and there, he orders her to read her letter on the table while she's bent over. When Lee says she doesn't understand, Mr. Gray asserts that there's nothing to understand before repeating his instruction. As she starts reading, Mr. Gray suddenly smacks Lee on her bottom, making her stop and stare at him in shock. Mr. Gray tells her to continue while proceeding to smack her as she reads the rest of the letter. When she finishes, Mr. Gray orders her to read the letter again, but this time, he's smacking her more. Lee seems to like what Mr. Gray is doing until he suddenly stops, bending over near her and laying his hands close to hers. As the two breathe heavily, Lee entwines her pinky with Mr. Gray's, but he tells her to straighten herself out before getting back to work. As she leaves Mr. Gray's office, a steamy Lee thinks about what just happened. Before returning to the front desk, Lee looks at her rear, which is now bruised up from Mr. Gray's spanks. Still, Lee looks more aroused than she is in pain, and with that, she returns to her station. Lee submits her letter to Mr. Gray, who then visits her while she's scanning some files, to tell her that she did well, making Lee smile. At home, Lee tells her mother that she could remove the lock on the cabinet now. The morning after, Lee throws her old stuff into the river, letting go of her past, before making her way to Mr. Gray's office. Throughout the day, Mr. Gray orders Lee around, making her do outrageous things while she willingly submits herself to all of Mr. Gray's orders. Later in the night, before Lee sleeps, she touches herself while thinking of Mr. Gray being with her. As she's doing it, she suddenly sees a picture of Peter, but she puts it down and lets her thoughts drift back to Mr. Gray. The next day, while Mr. Gray's speaking with a client on the phone, Lee spots a mistake on a letter she's working on. She thinks about erasing it, but she decides against it, wanting Mr. Gray to spot it. When she comes up to him, Mr. Gray ignores her and her attempts at seducing him. Annoyed, Lee moves back to her station. Later, Before Lee leaves for home, she asks Mr. Gray if he needs her to do anything else. Mr. Gray tells her that she's good for the day, and Lee heads back home, frustrated. The morning after, Lee is hanging out with Joan and some friends when someone called Joan, telling her that Bert has been confined to the hospital. Rushing to see Bert, Joan cries when she sees her husband in bed while Lee leaves for Mr. Gray's house instead. When she arrives, Mr. Gray is surprised to see her there and Lee stammers, trying to tell him how she feels, but she ends up making an excuse about a letter needed the next day. Mr. Gray just plays along, thanking Lee for reminding him before turning her away. The next day, Mr. Gray pushes Lee away even more, removing her from his office, stopping their activities together, and even throwing away the red markers he uses to correct her typing errors. Lee tries to seduce Mr. Gray even more, but he just keeps turning her down. This frustrates Lee, who's desperately trying to win him back by any means necessary. Later that night, Lee is back home, and inside her bathroom, she tries to smack herself while thinking of how Mr. Gray did it, but she fails to recreate the feeling. The next morning, she finds a worm in her yard and places it into one of Mr. Gray's letters. As she does this, Mr. Gray is surprised, and he only watches her before cleaning himself off in the restroom. When he returns to his office, Lee watches him longingly. Later that day, Lee is making out with Peter in bed. She tries to make him smack her bottom, but Peter just moves his hands back up. Lee then bends over on top of Peter, insisting that he shouldn't be afraid, but Peter misunderstands this and tries to hook up with her instead. Though Lee looks disappointed at first, she eventually lets Peter hook up with her under her conditions. When Peter finishes, Lee still looks disappointed, and her thoughts keep returning to Mr. Gray. The next day, Mr. Gray finds the letter with the worm and places it on a blank piece of paper. Then, using a red marker, he encircles the worm to show Lee her error as she comes inside his office. When Lee enters, she hears someone ring the doorbell, but Mr. Gray tells her to ignore it. He orders her to bend over, pull up her skirt, and remove her underwear. Lee is surprised by this, but she reluctantly follows as Mr. Gray stares at her, slowly getting closer before touching and pleasuring himself. As he does this, he starts shaking and gasping before leaning against Lee, finishing himself off, and walking back to his chair. While he does this, Lee just stays in place, looking confused but satisfied with what's happening. As Mr. Gray sits, he gives Lee some work to do. Despite her ongoing confusion, Lee accepts. She then goes to the restroom and sees a stain that Mr. Gray left on her, making her smile before she starts touching herself, moaning and talking to herself while imagining Mr. Gray on her. In the other stall, Lee's co-worker hears all of this, and Lee continues until she finishes. Meanwhile, Mr. Gray finds a stain left on his zipper, making him clean his pants immediately, desperately trying to remove the stain. Afterwards, Mr. Gray takes picture frames of Lee's letters and smashes them up. In a restaurant nearby, Lee listens to a tape about coming out as a submissive or dominant person. As for Mr. Gray, he's by the parking lot, burning his photographs of Lee and sadly watching the pictures melt away. The next day, Mr. Gray calls Lee up to his office and asks her the same questions he asked her when she applied for the job. Lee is surprised by this, but she plays along, answering all his questions. Finally, Mr. Gray tells her that he likes her, but she can't work for him because of her behavior. Still thinking that this is all a game, Lee plays along with him until he tells her to take her things away. Surprised, Lee asks him for a timeout, but Mr. Gray is serious and tells her that she's fired. Lee doesn't believe this, and she starts tearing up before slapping Mr. Gray. In turn, he starts pointing out Lee's annoying antics, trying to push her away, but Lee submits to him, reassuring him that she'll just follow him. Mr. Gray then appears to lean in to kiss Lee before moving to his chair. As he sits, he tells her that she must leave or else he won't stop. He says that he can't take it anymore, but Lee keeps trying to reassure him, professing that she wants to know him more. She then massages Mr. Gray's head, relaxing him, but he still gives her a letter containing her pay and tells her to get out. In the end, Lee's forced to pack her things up and leave, crying while remembering the woman she saw on the day of the interview, her eyes also filled with tears. In the days after, she pretends to leave for Mr. Gray's office, watching it from across the street, and she even sees the new girl he hired as his secretary. She then tries meeting other people, seeing if their odd preferences would fit her, but she eventually stops, and instead, she focuses on helping her dad out. Later, Peter proposes to her and she says yes, not because she wanted to marry him, but because she didn't have any other choice. As she tries on her wedding dress, she suddenly removes her veil to stare at herself in the mirror. Lee then storms off, leaving her engagement ring on a table as she runs to Mr. Gray's office. There, she confesses to Mr. Gray that she loves him, But he denies this, telling her that they've resolved everything when he gave her severance check. Lee keeps reiterating her love for him until Mr. Gray orders her to keep her palms on his desk, keeping her there until he returns. Lee obeys, waiting for Mr. Gray while he watches her from outside. Later, Mr. Gray calls Peter and informs him that Lee is in his office. Afterwards, Mr. Gray calls the phone inside his office and is surprised to see Lee trying to answer it with her mouth. Seeing this, Mr. Gray mutters to himself, admitting that he likes Lee. Back inside, Peter suddenly enters the room, much to Lee's disappointment. She tells Peter to leave, claiming that he's trespassing, but the already confused Peter could only ask what's happening and why she's not moving her hands away from the table. She ignores him, and when Peter suddenly moves her away from the table, she screams in anger, slapping and hurting Peter, before returning to the desk to place her hands back on top of it. She then tells Peter that she doesn't want him and that he needs to get out, making the poor man leave. The morning after, Lee is sleepless and tired while she stays at the table, even with people coming to visit her and talk some sense into her. Others support her, but she only ignores them as she continues to stay there. Meanwhile, the rest of the people outside continue with their lives, including Mr. Gray, who just stays at home, thinking about Lee. On Lee's third day of staying inside the office, a local news crew report outside of the office, stirring up attention. Later that night, Mr. Gray finally makes his way back to the office and holds Lee, giving her some coffee. Lee is relieved to see him as he takes her from the office, then drives away to his house. While carrying her up to his room, Lee hugs him tighter, looking happy and relieved as he gently sets her down on a bed of grass. He then prepares a bath for her and cleans her up, washing her gently before drying her off with a towel. He then sets her back on the bed of grass so he can stare at her bare body, carefully looking at each of her scars. To this, Lee says that for the first time, she truly feels beautiful. The day after, Lee starts asking Mr. Gray questions about his life while he kisses parts of her body. Later, Lee muses about how they eventually started looking like any other normal couple. They got married and had their honeymoon in the mountains. One morning, she's helping Mr. Gray get ready for work, and they kiss each other goodbye. As he leaves, Lee places a cockroach on the bed, then dreamily watches Mr. Gray's car drive away. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video and would love to see more from this channel, please like and subscribe.